When I came back from my fishing trip up in Montana, my key would not turn in the lock of my own front door. I stood there on the porch for a good 30 seconds, just staring at the door like it owed me an explanation. I tried again. Nothing. The key went in fine, but it just spun uselessly, the way a key does when the lock has been changed. I stepped back and looked at the house, my house, the one I built with my own hands and my own savings over 40 years of running Callaway Auto and Body on Route 9 Inches, Mill Haven, Indiana. Same white shutters, same cracked second porch step I kept meaning to fix. Same hanging basket of petunias my late wife Dorothy planted the spring before she passed. Everything the same, except the lock. I pulled out my phone and called my son. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Dad," he said. He sounded relaxed, almost cheerful. "Marcus," I said. "I'm standing on my own front porch and my key doesn't work. You want to tell me what's going on?" There was a pause. Not a surprised pause, a prepared one. "We need to talk," he said. "I'm listening." Another pause. Then I heard my daughter-in-law's voice in the background, low and sharp, coaching him. And Marcus cleared his throat and said the words I had never in 63 years of living expected to hear from my own child. "Dad, we've had the locks changed. The house is in our name now. You signed it over, remember? When you were in the hospital last year. We're going to be selling it. There's a real estate agent coming Thursday." I didn't say anything for a moment. "You're selling my house," I said. "Our house, technically," he said, and I could hear Renee in the background saying something I couldn't make out. And then Marcus added, "You're 63, Dad. You can't run a property like this alone anymore. We're looking at a really nice assisted living facility over in Carmel. You'll be comfortable there." I looked out at the yard, Dorothy's rose bushes along the fence. The oak tree I planted when Marcus was born, now thick as a barrel and taller than the roof line. 41 years of my life in that house. "Assisted living," I said. "It's the right move, Dad." I took a long breath. And then I did something that seemed to confuse my son greatly. I smiled. "All right, Marcus," I said. "I'll be in touch." I ended the call, sat down on that cracked porch step, and I sent a text message to my attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia Holloway, who I'd been working with quietly for the past 7 months. The message was 3 words. It worked perfectly. Now let me back up, because none of this will make sense unless I tell you about the year that came before it. Dorothy died in March, 2 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. We had 8 months between the diagnosis and the end, which is 8 months more than some people get, and I am grateful for every one of those days, even though they were the hardest of my life. She was 61 years old. She had a laugh that could fill a room, strong opinions about pie crust and college football, and she was the only person in the world who ever truly understood me. When she was gone, I felt like someone had removed a load-bearing wall from inside my chest. Marcus and Renee were attentive during the illness. They came down from Indianapolis on weekends, helped manage the medical appointments, dealt with the insurance companies when I was too exhausted to argue. I was grateful. I told them so many times, I thought the grief had brought us closer. I was wrong about that. The shift was subtle at first. A comment here and there about how big the house was for one person. Questions about what I planned to do with the shop when I retired. Renee mentioning, more than once, how much properties in Millhaven had appreciated, how the market was extraordinary right now, what a shame it would be to let all that value just sit there. I filed it away as concern. I told myself they were just worried about me. Then in October, about 7 months after Dorothy passed, I had a small cardiac event. Nothing catastrophic, a warning, my cardiologist called it, a reminder from my heart that I wasn't 45 anymore and needed to slow down. I spent 4 days in St. Vincent's Hospital in Indianapolis, where Marcus and Renee live, because that's where the ambulance took me. During those 4 days, Marcus brought papers to the hospital. He said they were routine, power of attorney documents, he explained, in case something worse happened and I wasn't able to make decisions for myself. He was calm and kind, and he held my hand and he said, "Dad, I just need to make sure I can take care of things if you can't. That's all this is." And he said the doctors were in agreement that this was the sensible thing to do, And Renee nodded from the corner of the room with that careful smile she has, and I was exhausted and medicated, and I had just spent 3 days believing I might die. And so I signed. I signed more than I realized I was signing. What I thought was a standard, durable power of attorney, limited, medical, temporary, turned out to include a property transfer authorization that Marcus and Renee had buried in the document package with the help of a real estate attorney they'd hired. The language was dense and technical and designed, I would later learn, to be confusing on purpose. Page 11 of a 14-page document, in a font that required me to squint even with my glasses. They used it 3 weeks later to transfer the deed of my house and the title of the commercial property on Route 9, the shop Dorothy and I had built from a single-bay garage into a 12-employee operation over 30 years into a joint trust with Marcus as primary trustee. I didn't find out until December, when my accountant called me about a discrepancy in my property tax records. I want to describe what it feels like to learn that your own son has stolen from you. I want to find the right words for it, but the honest truth is, there aren't any. It's not like anger, exactly, though there's anger in it. It's more like a physical sensation, a dropping away of something solid beneath your feet, a sudden vertigo, a rearrangement of your entire understanding of your own life. Every memory you have of that person goes through a kind of filter in an instant. Every kindness reconsidered, every visit re-examined. You start asking yourself, how long? How long did they see me as an asset rather than a father? How long was I a problem to be managed? I sat in my accountant's office for a long time that afternoon. Frank Delaria has been doing my books for 20 years. He pushed a box of tissues across the desk toward me without saying a word, which is the kindest thing anyone had done for me since Dorothy died. I had 2 choices in front of me. I could call Marcus directly, confront him, make noise, threaten lawyers. He would deny it. Renee would lawyer up immediately. She worked in a law firm. She knew exactly how to run out the clock on a legal dispute, how to tie things up in motions and continuances until I ran out of money or energy or both. They had planned this carefully. A direct confrontation would hand them time to move assets, alter documents, prepare defenses, or I could be smarter than they expected me to be. I drove home from Frank's office and I sat in Dorothy's chair in the living room, the blue one by the window where she used to read, and I thought about my wife. Dorothy was the strategic one. I was the one with the temper, and she was the one who would put her hand on my arm and say, "Robert, there are 2 ways to win a fight. You can win the argument, or you can win the outcome. Pick one." She was right every time. I was going to win the outcome. The next morning, I drove to Indianapolis not to see Marcus, but to see Patricia Holloway. A colleague of Frank's had recommended her. She was 50-something, direct, and she had a framed needlepoint behind her desk that said, "Every document tells a story," and I knew immediately she was the right person. I laid everything out in front of her. The hospital documents, the property transfer records, my account of what Marcus had represented to me, my medical records from that hospital stay showing what medications I had been given and in what quantities on the day I signed. Patricia listened to everything without interrupting. Then she set down her pen and looked at me. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "what you are describing is financial elder abuse. It is a crime in Indiana. The transfer can be challenged on the basis of undue influence, fraud in the execution, and potentially your diminished capacity at the time of signing given your documented medical status." She paused. "But here's my honest counsel. If you go after this right now, directly, you will win something. What you probably won't win is everything. And you'll spend 2 to 3 years in litigation, watching them delay and maneuver." "What's the alternative?" I asked. She smiled. It was a precise, unhurried smile. "We build a case so complete that when we move, there is nothing left to argue." Over the next 7 months, Patricia and I worked quietly. I kept up normal contact with Marcus' holiday visits, phone calls, nothing that would alarm him. I let him believe I was adjusting to the new reality of the property situation. He occasionally mentioned, in carefully vague terms, that the trust structure was really the best arrangement for tax purposes, and I nodded along. What I was doing in the meantime: Patricia obtained my full medical records from Street. Vincentson retained a forensic pharmacologist who provided an expert affidavit establishing that the combination of medications I had been administered on the day I signed created a documented impairment of executive function. Judgment. In plain language, I was not in a condition to knowingly consent to a complex legal transaction. We hired a document examiner who analyzed the signing packet and identified that pages 11 through 13, the property transfer authorization, bore printing characteristics inconsistent with the rest of the document, indicating they had been inserted after the original document was assembled. In plain language, the document had been altered before I signed it. Patricia contacted the Indiana Attorney General's Elder Abuse Unit. This is a detail Marcus and Renee had not anticipated because they had thought of this as a civil matter, a family disagreement about property. They had not considered that what they had done was also a criminal act. The AG's office opened a quiet investigation. They pulled Marcus and Renee's communications emails, texts through a legal process I will not pretend to fully understand. What they found was a documented conversation thread going back 18 months before I signed anything, in which Marcus and Renee had discussed, in considerable and damning detail, the plan to obtain control of my assets. There were messages about timing waiting for a health event that would give them legal justification. There were messages about the specific attorney they hired to draft the modified document pages. There were messages from Renee that made my hands go cold when Patricia read them to me, because they were written with a clinical detachment that did not sound like a daughter-in-law at all. They sounded like someone planning a transaction. Patricia also helped me do something else, something that required more courage than any of the legal maneuvering. I contacted my younger brother, Raymond, who Marcus had always liked and trusted. I told Raymond everything, and Raymond, without tipping Marcus off about what I knew, began asking careful questions during his normal conversations with his nephew. Friendly, casual, uncle-to-nephew questions. He called me after each conversation and told me what Marcus had said. Marcus was planning to list both properties in the spring. He and Renee had already spoken to a real estate agent. They had projected the combined sale value of the house and the shop and had plans for the money plans that did not include me. I also, with Patricia's guidance, did one more thing. I went back to work at the shop. I had been semi-retired for a couple of years, coming in 2 or 3 days a week, while my shop manager Jimmy ran day-to-day operations. But the commercial property transfer meant Marcus technically now controlled the lease structure. He had not, however, done anything to alter the operational business. Callaway Auto and Body was still incorporated in my name, still had its own accounts, still employed its 12 people. He had taken the land and building, but he had not taken the business itself, and Patricia wanted it very clear in the record that I remained the active, functioning owner of the operation. So I started coming in every day. I talked to customers. I supervised jobs. Jimmy, who had worked for me for 14 years, and who I had told the full story to in strict confidence, made sure everything was documented and dated. Every morning I walked in, clocked in, worked. Every morning I was demonstrably not a man who needed assisted living. We also quietly changed something else. Patricia helped me establish a new, separate, revocable trust in my name only, properly executed with full mental competency documentation, witnessed correctly, airtight. Into this trust went certain assets that had never been included in what Marcus had taken. My savings accounts, my business accounts, several investment accounts Dorothy and I had held that were not real property. Marcus apparently had not realized these existed or had assumed he would handle them after the house and shop were sold. By the time I left for my fishing trip to Montana, a trip I had told Marcus about weeks in advance, casually, so he would know I was away, Patricia had everything ready. The AG's office had completed their review. The civil case filings were prepared. The criminal referral had been made. I spent 5 days fishing the Blackfoot River, which Dorothy and I had always talked about doing together and never managed to, and I caught 3 brown trout, and sat by the water in the evenings, and talked to her the way I had been doing since March of the previous year. I told her what was coming. I told her I thought she would have handled it better, more cleanly, without the 7 months of quiet patience it had cost me, because she was always smarter about people than I was. I told her I missed her every single day. When I flew home and drove out to Millhaven and found my key didn't work in my own front door, I was not surprised. I had expected it. Patricia had told me Marcus would likely move quickly once the real estate agent was confirmed for Thursday. Changing the locks was his way of making the takeover real, concrete, irreversible feeling. It was also, as it turned out, an additional criminal act unlawful exclusion of a lawful resident that went neatly onto the pile. So when I sat down on that cracked porch step and sent Patricia 3 words, I was not a confused old man who had been robbed. I was a man watching a plan complete itself. The following Tuesday morning, Marcus received a certified letter from the Indiana Attorney General's office. Simultaneously, Renee was served at the law firm where she worked, which I will admit was Patricia's idea, and which I had mixed feelings about. But Patricia said the simultaneous service was strategically important to prevent either of them from warning the other in time to coordinate a response. I heard about it from Raymond, who heard about it from Marcus in a phone call during which my son, apparently, cried. I don't tell you that with satisfaction. I want to be clear about that. Whatever Marcus had done, whatever calculation he had made about me and my worth to him, he was still the boy I taught to throw a baseball in the backyard of that house on a summer afternoon when he was 7 years old. He was still the kid who used to fall asleep in the shop waiting for me to finish a job so I could take him to get ice cream. The grief of it, not the anger, but the grief is something I am still carrying and expect to carry for the rest of my life. But grief and justice are not opposites. Dorothy taught me that too. The civil case and the criminal matter moved forward on parallel tracks. The property transfers were voided by court order within 6 weeks of filing, on the basis of fraud in the execution and undue influence. The judge's language was, as Patricia described it to me afterward, unusually pointed. The house and the shop came back to me. The locks were changed again, this time by a locksmith I hired myself. The criminal matter took longer. Elder financial abuse in Indiana, when it involves deliberate planning and amounts exceeding a certain threshold, and the combined value of my house and commercial property exceeded it significantly, is a serious felony. Marcus and Renee both faced charges. Their attorney negotiated. There were months of proceedings I will not detail here because they are ongoing, and Patricia advises me to say little about them publicly. What I can tell you is that the shop is open. Jimmy still runs the day-to-day, and I still come in 3 days a week, and drink bad coffee, and argue with customers about whether their car actually needs what they think it needs. The oak tree in the backyard is still there. Dorothy's rose bushes survived the winter. The porch step is still cracked, and I have still not fixed it, though I will get around to it, I am sure of it, one of these days. I did not go to assisted living. I have not spoken to Marcus since the morning I sat on the porch step and sent that text. I don't know if I ever will again. That is a question I cannot answer right now, and I have made a kind of peace with not being able to answer it. Some wounds require a long time before you can even look at them clearly, and I am not yet at the place where I can look at this one without flinching. Maybe I will get there. Dorothy would probably say, I will. She was usually right. What I want to say to anyone who is listening to this, and I mean this as plainly and directly as I can say it, is that if something like this has happened to you or is happening to you, the most important thing I learned is this: do not react and do not wait. Those seem like contradictions, but they are not. Do not react in the sense of do not show your hand, do not escalate before you are ready, do not let your anger move faster than your preparation. But do not wait in the sense of do not talk yourself out of acting, do not minimize what was done to you, because the person who did it is someone you love. Do not let exhaustion or heartbreak convince you that it is too complicated or too late. Get an attorney who specializes in elder law. Get your financial records in order. Write down everything you remember about every conversation, every document, every signature, with dates and locations. Talk to your accountant. Talk to your doctor. In most states, what I experienced is not just a civil wrong, it is a crime, and there are people in your state government whose specific job is to pursue it. You are not too old to fight. You are not too tired to fight. And you do not have to do it loudly or dramatically or in a way that announces itself. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is smile, hang up the phone, and send 3 words to the right person. I came back from Montana with 3 brown trout and the end of a 7-month plan, and I stood on the porch of my house in the September afternoon light, and I looked at Dorothy's rose bushes, and the oak tree I planted the year my son was born, and I thought about how much she would have enjoyed this moment. And I said out loud, to nobody in particular, "Okay, old girl, that's done." Then I called a locksmith and went inside and made myself a cup of coffee. Some endings don't need to be loud.